Hi, welcome to the Community Table, a new podcast hosted by me, Heather Elder of Heather Elder Represents,
and me, Kelly Montez of Apostrophe.
If you've been in the industry for a while, you might remember the original Community Table series I co-hosted with Kate Chase from 2012 to 2017. It was a space for producers, creatives, and industry leaders to gather and talk openly about the work, the challenges, and the changes we were all navigating at the time.
And in 2025, there's no shortage of things to talk about, from AI and evolving client relationships to the way content is being created.
That's why we decided to bring the Community Table back, but this time as a podcast. Kelly and I will co-host, reflecting on the expanding conversations we're having every day with our artists, producers, and creatives shaping what comes next. Whether you're a seasoned producer, a curious creative, or just someone trying to figure out how to thrive in this changing landscape, there's always room at the table.
My name's Arlo Rosner. I'm the executive producer and director of special projects at Preacher. Been there for about a year.
I am Aggie Ryan, and I am a producer at Preacher. I've been at Preacher for over 4 years now.
I am Whitney Calvin. I am an assistant producer here, and I've been here for about a year and a half.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for being here today and for giving us your time. Arlo, I'm going to kick off the question to you. It's been an exceptionally interesting year in 2025, and I'm curious, if you had to pick one word to describe our industry, what would that one word be?
The one word, and it's advertising in general, but marketing, I would use the word reactive. I think it's a result of all the information we cherish that we get so quickly, both analytically, revenue, all of it comes instantly. And as an industry, we have to react to it and alter our thinking or pivot accordingly in a really fast manner. And I don't know, I can't say if I agree with it, but reactive is certainly the word of the year for me.
Aggie, how about you?
I think the word that I would choose to describe the advertising industry would be vibrant. And I think I would attribute that to the collaborative nature of the people that we work with. I think we tend to find ourselves collaborating with people who are excited about certain concepts and excited to have a vibrant input on the ideas that we put forward.
Amazing. I love that answer. What about you, Whitney?
Well, Arlo kind of said my word, but my word is fast. I feel like things are just getting faster, expectations are higher, budgets are tighter, timelines faster. So I think we're just all, working at a really fast pace across the whole industry. And whether we like it or not, it's happening.
That actually leads into a really great question that I had, and I'm going to toss it back to you, Arlo. There is so much pressure around quick data and ROI on ad campaigns. How do you keep space for real brand building and emotional storytelling within the advertising that you're creating for your clients?
I can attribute it to all the words we just used, one of which is Aggie's description of collaborative, excited partners. I particularly rely on partners and look for partners that have that enthusiasm Aggie mentioned that we're fortunate enough to work with so often, that don't take it so much, the quickness, don't take it so much as a detriment, but something that is an evolution of our industry that can be fun if you kind of put your mind to it in the right way. And, that's contrasted to the ROI side. And sometimes I wish a brand or a client or a resulting campaign had a little more time to quote unquote, let the pot sit in the water and see what it really did, as it does take a certain amount of time to affect a mass population of people. But I think if you work with the right people and you use the right tools, which have also over the course of my career certainly gotten faster, you can keep up with the pace in a positive, kind of fun way.
Speed has changed so much in our industry, not only in terms of production timelines, but just how long a campaign will sit out in the world. I'm going to pass this to you, Whitney. With clients, the expectation of speed and scope, how do you feel that they're viewing how often they need to be changing campaigns or strategies?
We just worked on a project, and I will say, like, the speed also allows you to be relevant. We worked on an activation that was super fun, but it required us to put content out within 24 hours. And we even had to add an additional half-day shoot the day before, only to get PR content to give out to media so that they could go on the news that day. So I think we're getting faster, but it's also allowing us to be more relevant and, get things out the day it's happening, which is fun. But yeah, I think for clients, like, they are, like Arlo said, becoming reactive and, trying to jump on the trends, and how can we be a part of this moment in culture, and asking us to react to that really quickly too.
I'm curious, Aggie, if what's happening in the world, from political climate to cultural zeitgeist, like how much that plays a role in work coming up. And as we look forward, because now we're here at the end of 2025 and we're getting ready for 2026, how have you found that the agency and clients are moving into 2026? Are they feeling positive and ready for work to be created? Or are people looking around and saying, like, let's see what happens at the top of the year, culturally and politically, before we start making our plan?
I would say generally we're seeing positivity around bringing out new work. Although I would say that there is an extra lens of being just more cautious about certain things that we're putting out, just making sure we're sending the right message. And, people can interpret things all different ways. And so I think there's just in terms of client approvals, I think we're noticing everyone's coming at it with a more heightened lens of wanting to make sure everything is sending the correct message that we're trying to share.
Arlo, I'm so curious about your job title.
My job?
EP and Special Projects. I'd love to know a little bit more about how Preacher is arranged and what the core departments are at your agency, and maybe a little bit about these special projects of yours.
Preacher at its core was founded by a strategist, a account director, and a creative. So it has very much a triangle of those leadership pillars. And, production supports that as needed. And that's how we approach pretty much every client and every project and every campaign, as a very creative-led, idea-first model. And the special projects of it all is that amidst any sort of structure, that being one of them, advertising agencies and production companies, every entity in this industry is being asked to do a little more with less, to Whitney's point. And so as Preacher is growing and when the clients need, there's not always enough money, time, or other resource to execute every required need of an agency of record type relationship. So I think an agency like Preacher in its growth model has a natural trajectory toward offering more of that without the substantive support of traditional vendor relationships. Sure, do 10-pole campaigns, do traditional advertising, always making what we've come to know as advertising, but not always needing to rely solely on outside partners, especially when things move this fast.
Well, Aggie, I'm curious for you what productions have looked like over your time at Preacher and how they may have evolved. I know when I started in the industry, like I would have my stills campaign, I would have my TV commercial, I would have my radio spots. They'd work together, but we had time for each one of those.
When I started at Preacher, I was the production coordinator. So this was my first job out of college. And I was really learning the agency and the industry as I was, in my first few months and year at Preacher. And, I was assisting and meeting a lot of people throughout that first couple years as the coordinator, which really launched and helped me into that assistant producer role. So that those projects were a lot more small scale. It was a lot more photography driven and smaller projects that were maybe more local to Austin. Whereas now that I am a producer, I am finding myself more on broadcast and social forward projects. We're bundling photography into a lot of our jobs as well. But I've definitely seen a growth in productions at Preacher, and it's cool to see the agency grow while I'm also growing as well, because we have also just gotten bigger as well. I started when there was maybe like 40 people at the agency, and now Preacher's closer to 80.
That's incredible. Whitney, same question to you. Do you find that now projects have different facets to them, and what that looks like from a production standpoint for you in terms of pulling it all together?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually started my career at another agency up in Portland, and I was there for about 4 years on the account side, and then made the switch to production when I came here. So, having that perspective of 2 agencies now has been great, because I have been able to see just the growth and also the range that these productions can have. I think every production now, they're going to want a stills photographer. They're going to want BTS. They're going to want social. Every production now is like, how can we get the most content out of this one shoot?
That efficiency by default leads to continuity, which I think if you do it mindfully, to our earlier discussion, that's where you get a certain benefit from the mass of content. You can build campaign continuity that is actually really beneficial. The more you're required to think that way, the more you can then strategically add that into the creative composition of the idea.
Looking at it holistically just helps the campaign.
What does that mean for you when you're looking for a production partner? How does someone get on your radar? Where are you going to look for that person, and what qualities are you hoping that they embody?
As producers, we start early on making lots of lists of people that we would love to work with and that we think would be right for the campaign. But it ultimately becomes a very collaborative experience with our creatives as well. We, spend a lot of time looking at reels and diving through websites and filing back in our Rolodexes to see if there's someone that we've originally collaborated with on a previous campaign that might be the right fit for a certain project. And it just, it takes a few calls and a few vibe checks to just make sure everyone's on the same page about the creative vision and, see who would be the best fit.
What about you, Arlo? Is there creative partners? What do you look for in a creative partner? And how are you conveying to them? Because I know you've mentioned too that you're leaning on them to see what else they can bring. So curious where you look and what qualities you're looking for in that creative partner.
I look first to who I've worked with before, obviously, but in this new world, there's so many new mediums and so many new executions and ways that people have cracked the code that it's really just a puzzle of how everything can work together. And then to Aggie's point, vibes are probably the most important at a certain point, because there's so many good options, so many good partners, so many smart, talented people, that you also have to look at who you can spend 17 hours with for 6 weeks straight. That's where collaboration comes from. That's where the frequency of, idea generation can either wane or really flourish.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to ask you guys about the role of AI in your creative. I mean, I think it's 2024. It was definitely, we saw a lot more of it, and it was absolutely a buzzword. Arlo, I'm curious what you are seeing now on your end as far as both the current uses of AI and what you would predict would happen in 2026.
You're definitely correct. I think the most prevalent use of AI is in creative presentations and boards, and really, the conveyance of an initial concept. It used to take days. It can take hours. And, that's probably where I see it best suited right now. I think I have a opinion that I think it's going to kind of file itself in the tool category pretty quickly. Again, I'll lean on my thousands of years in this industry, but I've watched user-generated content claim to be the replacer of broadcast film. I've watched HD be the replacer of film, and it's coming. There's always a technological advancement that is this sword that's going to cut it all down. Did Illustrator stop illustrators? But no, it has a use, and you're still seeing hand-painted signs. Graffiti is still everywhere. And I just don't think AI is the end-all replacement that people are fearful of. And there's a lot of conversation around them that lead to the legality of where the models are being built from, which is all created, inspired material made by a human anyway. So there's that. So eventually there's limitations legally to what you can actually do. But there's not like a magic fix to human labor and creativity either. A good AI spot or a good AI piece of content, art or other, still takes hundreds of hours of human input in the form of prompts and creative thought based on a result driven by a computer generated image or sequence. Believe it or not, my opinion, my prediction will be business affairs, compliance, wiping logos. Maybe people who spend hundreds of hours rotoscoping won't have to do that anymore, but it's not going to affect the core creative idea.
Whitney, what about you? What sort of client requests do you see coming down the line in 2026 regarding AI?
We've definitely had the asks from clients, not only like how can we incorporate AI, but what is our opinion? We've had presentations on Preacher's specific approach to AI. I think Arlo said it. It works best, and what we're using it right now for is creative concepting. I've definitely seen it be helpful in that way. ChatGPT is my friend. But yeah, in terms of clients, I think everyone's very curious. Clients are seeing other brands put AI work out there, and it's like, how can they do that as well and be relevant? And I think we're all just learning together and exploring it together.
And Aggie, I see you shaking your head. Curious to see what predictions you have for this coming year of how AI is going to enter our production world.
Just in the near future, I think I see it affecting photography a lot. Like I could see the generation of like building backgrounds and stuff as a bit of, to eliminate certain shoots. I think that would be really could be efficient. I think there needs to be some technological advancements with making these backgrounds look more realistic. I think we're still at that phase where we can kind of tell. Our eye is trained enough to know the difference between something that looks generated versus real. And so, and it all has to do with the lighting and the way, a subject looks in that environment. And so I think once that technology advances enough, I think we will start to see that more. But it could, save some production dollars by doing it all in post rather than bringing everyone to a shoot.
Retouching partners have used it for background extensions, just like you said, and generative fill, and Adobe's new products coming in, and it's faster, which is good because as we've talked about, the timelines are so much faster from when you produce to when you are releasing out into the world. And you said something very interesting of how you feel like it's going to affect photography. Arlo, I'll pass this to you. I mean, Heather and I started primarily as stills artist representatives, and our job has changed so much. We now have directors on our roster. We're now doing the, video and still shoots put together. I'm curious to know what you think the role of photography is in the future, given how much the algorithms also lean on moving image.
I can't say for sure. I mean, there's still plenty of use for all content. I mean, even in the algorithmic world, the carousels are still well-worn territory. I think the world itself will lead toward a more motion-centric place. We see it in all the science fiction movies that everything moves, every billboard moves. Minority Report, Blade Runner. I mean, that's where we're headed. So I don't know where exactly stills live, but there is, to your point, a magic to like art and creativity that I don't think goes anywhere. And so there's always going to be a use for still photography or still imagery, one way or the other. And AI still, to Aggie's point, is not a real photograph. And even just culturally, people are picking up true film cameras again for the first time in volume we haven't seen in 2 or 3 decades. So there's still, again, there's artists behind it all. There's humans behind all of it that have to choose which tool to use. So those artists and those people are the same people we're selling to. So it's like you have to meet them where they are. And so if you have a culture that's inherently leaning back in toward 35 millimeter film and liking the way that looks, you can't sell to them with an AI generated image.
Usage rights have always been really important on the photography side of the business. And with directors, it's work for hire. And when they gave up those rights, it was, 16:9 and not what TV commercials are today, which are works of art. I'm curious about the role of usage in the conversation with clients. Are clients still open to paying usage rights to photography, or are they more used to now just
buying out
rights?
Yeah,
buying out.
I would say we're often seeing the full buyout in perpetuity situations. But Arlo, Whitney, tell me if you guys have experienced anything differently.
Yeah, I think clients are still open to the conversation around usage, but what I've seen is the usage is becoming shorter terms because content is changing so quickly. They don't necessarily know if they're going to be running it for 3 months or 6 months. In 6 months, the landscape could be completely different and they want a new spot up. So I think what we're doing now a lot is 3 months or 6 months with the option for extension.
No, I'd agree with all that. I think the option extension language is more frequent in a license of any kind, music and stills. The biggest thing that I think drives that conversation is the scope of not only the work, but the artists and the talent. If you have a celebrity in an image, they're going to require the usage that they can't then be the forever spokesperson of that brand. So there's usage tied to the talent themselves that sometimes becomes the anchor. And same with the scope of the photographer. If they're big time photographers, they won't do buyouts. And if they are, they're tremendously cost prohibitive. So I think it's just a conversation and it's ultimately about money and scope.
What would your general trend predictions for 2026 be?
I think reactive holds. I think that's just a matter of the pace we're is prevalent in this conversation. I think the reactive nature of what's the competition doing today when you have so much competition so readily available to a consumer. I think there'll be a lot more work being done. Perhaps at a lower budget, maybe a bunch more for less, but people will be willing to follow through and award work.
I do think that we're going to see a lot more behind the curtain content. Whitney had mentioned this earlier, like we're seeing more of a request for BTS stuff, content about the making of the content, and I think we're just going to see maybe some more requests for that. I think I agree with Arlo too. Like I don't see things slowing down. So I think it'll just be an addition to those deliverables lists.
Whitney, what about you? What trends do you see in 2026?
I see us going more social first. Clients are wanting more and more how to be relevant on social. I also see influencers playing a bigger role. I think each campaign now, at least that I've been working on, there has been an ask for influencers and how can they help support that campaign and reach, get their reach and their followers involved.
Yeah, well, and those influencers have a media channel, a built-in media channel, so
Exactly.
that makes sense. If you could sit at the table with anyone, past, present, or future, who would that be?
I might be pretty boring and say maybe Barack Obama, because he has enough awareness of what's happening right now. Because as cool as I could say Abraham Lincoln or whatever, I would love to get his take on, your question about 2026, for instance. But no, he's a mind-blowing person to me, and he was able to navigate such tricky times. I would love to hear what he has to say about all this one-on-one, all of it.
I've been thinking about this. I think my person is Willie Nelson. Not only personally, I grew up on his music. When I was little, I actually thought he was my grandpa for some reason.
I love that.
I think because I have a great aunt who I'm very close with, and she listened to him all the time and almost talked about him as if he was someone we really related to. So I've always just kind of felt this connection to him. But I think also just as a human, he has such a great outlook at life. I think just living every day to the fullest. And I think he's just such a creative and wholesome spirit. And he's obviously getting up there. So I think it would be amazing to sit down with him.
Aggie, what about you?
My filmmaker self wants to say a director of some sort. My creative side wants to say someone who an influential artist of some sort. But I think I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm going to go with Emma Chamberlain, the influencer who is started out as a young YouTuber, pioneered, a very distinct editing style. She's kind of all over the internet and has developed just her own brand through her coffee company, through her podcast. I think she would be a really interesting person to talk to, because I think for her age, first of all, she'd be really cool to hang out with. We're around the same age. And secondly, I think she's just someone who has had a great head on her shoulders through the growth of her career. And I think she would have really cool advice and predictions to say about 2026, to say about the future, about trends that she's expecting. She'd have some really good insight to share just from a creative standpoint as well, just in terms of fashion and working directly with brands and being a young woman in the industry and being able to stay so true to herself. I've always just admired her.
Yeah, I mean, she's built a dynasty already at such a young age. Yeah, she's an influencer, but she is a female businesswoman for sure.
Absolutely.
What's the craziest thing that you've ever produced, or the one funky piece of knowledge that you have in your brain thanks to this wacky industry that we work in?
One that was very wild and crazy to produce and actually follow through was, and it was for a brand. I don't think it was released, so I'll just leave it that it was for a brand campaign, but did a documentary film that was the entirety of an organ transplant, starting with like the doctors and the patients prior, the person waiting for this organ, the tragic turn of events that led to the organ being available, the acquisition of the organ, the transportation and eventual replacement with teams in the operating room to capture that, followed by the successful results of the procedure, all kind of in a singular documentary story, but then tying it back to a brand marketing message. It was exceptionally interesting and wild. I mean, I've done a lot of weird stunts and things like that, but that one was like truly wild.
So I personally love like experiential and activations and fabricating. I love weird fabricated stuff. So one thing I worked on at my past agency, it was with Voodoo Ranger IPA, which is New Belgium Brewing. They make what they claim is the world's strongest beer. So we took that very literally and made the world's physically strongest beer. So we worked with a local fabricator and made this crazy can that actually functioned as a beer can. But it was like 1/4-inch steel wrapped with all these crazy things. You had to open it with an Allen key and stab it. And it was so wild. It was so heavy to hold and crazy to bring into FedEx and ask them to ship it for me.
Oh my gosh.
But we made about 10 of them and actually sent them to influencers all around the world. Had to send one to, I want to say like Hungary, to this guy who he has the hydraulic press. And so he tried to crush the can. So the whole concept was like, who can crush the can? We also worked with the world's strongest man. So I think that was just such a fun campaign because it was so out of the box. And I just love the fabrication side of things and just these real world experiences. I know I'm only allowed one, but also just because it's relevant.
No, I love it.
And
Let's
it's
hear it.
a preacher project. We just did this summer, but it was for Hertz, and it's this program we launched called the Gold Squad to help promote their Gold Plus Rewards program. And we got to bring 20 golden retrievers into the airport.
Yes.
So that one was just
Puppies.
special because we
Yes.
got to work with 20 golden retrievers.
I mean, how could you be in a bad mood on that set? That sounds fantastic.
Exactly.
Aggie, what about you? What's the craziest piece of knowledge that lives in your brain or the funkiest thing that you've ever produced?
Yeah. So the funkiest thing I've ever produced was actually this bringing back Willie Nelson. This was an activation that was hosted on Willie Nelson's ranch. It's called Luck Ranch for a big festival called Lucktoberfest. And so there's actually the ranch itself is almost like a film set kind of situation where there's a bunch of houses and there's actually this one chapel that preacher found it very fitting to activate. And so the concept was that we would invite the attendees of this festival to come and confess their sins in this chapel. And so we basically invented this preacher confessional radio that for a while I had to do a little research to see if we could actually get a radio station, and I quickly learned by the radio connoisseurs that that's not possible for the small space that we were in. So our team was on this ranch and we were stringing wires all throughout the whole festival, like the grounds, so that when people speak into this microphone, there's speakers like planted all throughout the, different like gathering spaces. And so you're confessing your sins to everyone. And so we of course recorded the thing too. And it was, we heard a lot of juicy gossip. We ended up making a cool case study with it, and people just had some hilarious things to say, especially after a few beverages as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Dangerous.
Thanks for joining us at the community table. Bringing this conversation to life with Kelly has been such a rewarding way to build on the original series. The more the industry evolves, the more we believe in the power of open, honest dialogue to help us all navigate what's next. We hope today's discussion left you with fresh ideas, new perspectives, or simply a sense that you're part of a larger creative community that's figuring it out together. Be sure to subscribe, share the episode, and pull up a chair next time. There's always a seat waiting for you at the table.